The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
29 years after Washington's football team played its last game at RFK Stadium, looks like they're coming back. Not a done deal yet. It's a lot of mishigas that they have to go through. But having observed what went on with the Nationals and their stadium 20 years ago, I think we got a deal in place. A lot of things have to change. There are some things that have to be worked out. There's going to be a lot of grandstanding that's going to go along the way. But yesterday, some big news broken by NBC4, and not totally unexpected because if you talk to people around town in the know, they've been telling you, the deal is going to get done. It's just a matter of time. As a matter of fact, the other day I saw Mark Toohey, and Mark Toohey was very instrumental in getting baseball here in 2005. He was the former head of the D.C. Sports Commission, the former general counsel to the mayor. He is as connected as anyone that I know into D.C., and he said, it'll get done. And this was Tuesday. The story broke last night on Channel 4, so we move ahead, and we'll get to all the details on that coming up. There's some NBA to discuss. The Dallas Mavericks, left for dead, are moving on. Still a long way to go for them, but at least they got through their first-round game last night in the play-in, beating Sacramento on the road last night, so we'll get to that and more. Also, in the next hour, I've been meaning to get to this for the last few days, just haven't had the chance. Dan Quinn did a podcast that is co-hosted by Alex Smith and also features Shane Battier, who played at Duke and played a long time in the NBA. And, you've heard Dan Quinn with lots and lots of news conferences, but he talks about himself and his journey to get to where he is now. And very, very insightful stuff. And he obviously has a lot of respect for the questioners. And while he does, talk easily at these news conferences, he just doesn't give you a ton of information. He addresses all the reporters by name, which, instantly disarms them. And, it's all good and everybody feels good, especially when the team is winning like they did this past season, getting to the NFC Championship game. So we'll get to that in the next hour. But the news that was broken yesterday by Channel 4 is that the deal that has been made between Mayor Muriel Bowser and Josh Harris. And, there was a photo op where Harris and Mitch Rales, and I'm not sure who else was with them. It may have been just the two of them. But they went down to the congressional offices to lobby for this. They obviously want that to happen. And the picture seemed to indicate, it's done. And they had to push back on it a little bit, not so fast. And there is going to be, pushback. There's a group called Homes, Not Stadiums, and they want the district to prioritize affordable housing. There's also that the cutting of the budget, the $1 billion cut imposed by Congress. And as it says here in the story on NBC, the Congress-induced budget has left D.C. officials with a $410 million shortfall to close between now and the end of the fiscal year in September, one that they're still hoping the House of Representatives will reverse when lawmakers return from recess at the end of the month. The budget is apparently done. It is set to be released sometime next month. So they're not saying what's in it exactly. But, if you look at what happened with the baseball team, there was big pushback to build a stadium that was going to cost, I think initially it was like $600 million. Seems quaint now when we're talking about billions. Like this stadium is going to cost $3 billion, with the district paying about $500 million of that. But there was pushback that the district was not going to pay that, and there was a big push made by Linda Kropp and the city council on that. And it came down to the 11th hour, and they finally got it done. And that's why I think that they can be pretty confident it'll get done here, because the even though the baseball stadium opened during a recession, the tax dollars that have come back came back much faster than anybody expected and have much surpassed what they spent on the stadium. So what seems like an enormous amount of money now, like, for example, when Dan Snyder bought the Commanders for $800 million and then sold for $6 billion, you realize that numbers, change pretty quickly as time goes on. So this deal does seem to be at the goal line right now, and whether or not they fumble at the one, we'll have to see, but it looks like it's going to go through. Mark Seagraves of Channel 4 was the one who broke this. He was on last night with Jim Handley and Yoon Yang with the details.
If you don't win the stadium, it's bad news. But if you do, you really should be celebrating because you're getting very, very close now.
This has been in the works for a while, Mark, and these are some pretty darn big numbers.
Yeah, so it's important to point out this is not a done deal. Negotiations are still ongoing. This is fluid. These numbers could change. But multiple sources familiar with the deal tell News 4 Mayor Bowser and the team have the framework for a deal in place that would see the team paying the vast majority of the cost to build the new stadium and much of the money provided by the city going for infrastructure that would support the entire 180-acre development. Now, those documents obtained by News 4 show the team would put as much as $2.5 billion toward the stadium. The district government would provide up to $850 million. Now, according to those documents, the district's contribution, $850 million, would go toward what are referred to as eligible capital costs associated with the stadium and infrastructure for the stadium and the surrounding 180-acre campus, including parking structures that would serve the entire development. The district's investment would be paid in installments, with the first $500 million paid out between 2026 and 2030 for various portions of the work as the stadium and infrastructure are completed. The additional $350 million would be paid in 2032 through taxes generated from the new development at that site to cover the cost of the stadium and infrastructure. Now, the deal calls for the stadium and the parking structures to be completed by the fall of 2030. Team owner Josh Harris has been clear he wants the new stadium, wherever it is, to be ready for that 2030 season.
Mark, yeah, of course, you asked the mayor about this story. What is she saying about all of it?
So officially today, the mayor and the team have declined to provide us any comment. But on Monday at a press conference, the mayor announced that her 2026 budget was complete and ready to be transmitted to the council. Well, we know that if the mayor has a deal for a new stadium, it has to be in that 2026 budget. So I asked her. Here's what she said.
Can I ask, does it include funding for a stadium, for an NFL stadium?
One thing, Mark, in deciding how we're going to move it forward through our process, which is CFO to council, we'll also be talking about how we can start communicating about what's in it.
The mayor artfully dodged your question there. What else do we know, Mark, about how this deal will be crafted and what it means for the entire RFK site, just not the stadium and parking?
Yeah, so the preliminary agreement refers to the team as the master developer. So what that means, it tells us that not only will the team build the stadium, but they'll also develop that entire 180 acres around the stadium, which the mayor and council members have said they want to also see mixed use, residential and retail, as well as some green space on that area. It was recently reported that Josh Harris, the owner of the Commanders, has hired J.G.B. Smith's Properties Executive Vice President, former Executive Vice President, Andy Van Horn. Van Horn specializes in mixed-use developments, and he was part of the team that developed the Amazon 2 headquarters development.
Right.
Oh, so what has to happen next to get this deal done across the goal line, so to speak?
We're in the red zone. How many sports metaphors can I beat to death
Put them all
tonight,
in
right?
there.
So, again, not a finalized deal. There are still details being worked out between the team and the mayor's office. The first hurdle is this looming $410 million budget cuts that we've been reporting on, that they're facing this in the next 6 months that have been imposed by Congress. So that's the first thing that has to get resolved. Once that's behind, then the mayor can present her budget for the next fiscal year, 2026, which would have the stadium funding in it. That would need to be approved by the D.C. Council and then by Congress. Also, there is separate legislation that is ready to go from the mayor to the council that would iron out development and use details for the site, including zoning. Zoning is going to be a big conversation as we go forward. There is an effort by a group of residents right now to do a ballot initiative that would, if it was passed by voters, would limit and restrict what could be built on that site to simply residential and would block a stadium deal from being. Now, look, D.C. voters are very familiar with voter initiatives. They've been very successful with medical cannabis, with the tipped wages for tipped workers, right? And so, but what we also know is the council has the authority to overturn a voter initiative. So all that is out there. The biggest hurdle the mayor is facing, and I got to tell you, we didn't do her any favors by breaking this story, because I'm sure she would have preferred to resolve the $400 million in cuts before rolling this out. So now she's going to have to answer questions and sell to the public and council. On the one hand, we're going to be doing furloughs, cutting services, cutting hundreds of millions of dollars from the budget. On the other hand, we want to find financing to do this $800 million deal to bring the team back to D.C. So that's going to be a heavy lift.
But big picture-wise, the story is that that'll eventually bring money into the city.
That's the mayor's argument. Look, if you are pro-stadium, this is great news. And if you compare this deal, again, if you're pro-stadium and you compare this deal to other big stadium deals around the country, the team putting up this kind of money, I was just talking to J.P. Finley, he can only name one other team that has put that kind of money into building a stadium, and the jurisdiction putting in so much less. So that if you're opposed to this, no matter what the dollar amounts are, because you're like, hey, you're cutting services, you're laying people off, you know, I want more cops. I don't want to stadium. We heard neighbors saying they prefer a grocery store in that neighborhood rather than a stadium.
Great points.
So you have to get through all of that. But that's going to be the conversation over the next few weeks. But look, what this shows us is that the team and the mayor are very serious, very close, and it's clear that Josh Harris and Mayor Bowser have a really good working relationship. You saw him go to Capitol Hill to lobby on behalf of the district on different issues. And so, again, if you want the team back, this, red zone, we're not across the goal line, whatever other,
We got red all around us because you broke this story, red zone, and it's breaking us. But
too soon to paint 30-game goal.
Right, but we do know definitively now that the Commanders want to be at RFK.
Oh,
I mean that's
Josh
without
Harris
a doubt.
has been clear about
how but now Maryland is off the table.
We haven't heard Pete from Maryland.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah, and so we're close. They're serious. This could not have come at a worse time, though. Our reporting and just the deal, the timing with Congress imposing this $400 million. And look, there's a possibility that Congress could look and say, no, we reported the other day how it was $1.1 billion in cuts. Now it's $400 million. That's still iffy, right? Congress could come back and say, no, right. So there's a lot ahead. The mayor has taken the day off because it's a holiday in D.C. today. She's not going to have a lot of days off going forward after this.
That's Mark Seagrave, who broke the story on Channel 4 last night. So a couple things. One, you've always heard that it takes 3 years to build a stadium. That's what it took to build Nats Park. And this is 2025. You might say, well, why can't this stadium open in 2028? I'm really surprised about this, but I guess this is the case. They're not going to implode RFK. They're going to take it down piece by piece, is my understanding, and it's going to take about 18 months just to take down the old stadium. So they haven't started to do that yet, and that's why they have that timetable of 2030. As far as the financing for it, as Seagrave said, there could be up to $850 million. It's going to be a $3 billion plus stadium, and from all I've heard, it's going to be a dome stadium because you just can't have 10 football games at a $3 billion stadium. You got to have concerts and a lot of conventions, things like that are going to take up some of the other dates of the year. There's also a little bit of carping about the good old days of tailgating at the lots at RFK. Well, a lot of this is going to be underground parking. But for someone like me who doesn't mind riding Metro, in fact, I like it, this is good because my understanding is what I've been told if they had rebuilt in Landover, which nobody wanted to see, including Maryland residents, despite all the public displays by Wes Moore showing up at training camp and so forth, his heart is in the right place, but he knows his constituents in Maryland don't want this thing to stay in Landover. They want to see it back in D.C., and Virginia was never going to be a factor. That was just something for leverage, and we saw the debacle that Ted Leonsis had a year and a half ago. So that wasn't going to happen, and this was really the only logical conclusion here. Now, the Harris Group, while they're worth a lot of money, they don't just, peel off $2 billion and say, here you go. According to what's being reported in the Post, the NFL has a stadium loan program to finance a portion of their contribution. And Roger Goodell has been actively involved in the talks. In fact, I think this was the case, that Roger Goodell and Josh Harris went together to Congress to lobby for this. So the league is behind this. This is a big thing. But the financing is interesting because maybe 20 years ago, NFL owners said, hey, we don't need to be paying for our own stadiums. We need the jurisdictions to pay for it, and we'll put our teams there. And because of the costs now, there are more and more owners that are ponying up the money. And Stan Kroenke, who owns the Rams, he said, the hell with it. He just built a $5 billion stadium in Los Angeles, and he may easily recoup that money for all the things they do there. And he's got a co-tenant now with the Chargers and other events that they hold there. So this is going to be a big boost for D.C. You've seen what goes back to, 1997 when Abe Pollin built the MCI Center. You saw what it did for that area. You've seen what has happened now in the area where the Nats Park is. And so this will ultimately bring in a lot of tax dollars for D.C., but it's a question of if you need to spend money to make money. The answer is always yes, and there's pushback, including from Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, who says he's not opposed to the stadium, doesn't want to use public dollars for it. Well, realistically, they're going to do it, and they'll get it back. What seems like an exorbitant amount of money, and it is, what seems like an insane amount of money, $850 million just to pay for a portion of the stadium. Down the road, that'll look like a smart investment. It's just like NFL contracts. When you sign Patrick Mahomes to a deal that could be worth $500 million, down the road you have to renegotiate because there's not enough money. And that's the way things work with buildings and stadiums and so forth. So I'm pleased about this. It's still a long way off, still another 5 seasons at Northwest Stadium, but at least that there's the promised land. Just like, when they were at RFK with the Nationals, that was a decrepit stadium. It was kind of decrepit when the Senators left in 1971, and it was only 10 years old. But knowing that there was going to be a new ballpark built, that we all went to games, some of us anyway, went to games at RFK. For some, it was nostalgic. I went to many Senators games when they played there before they went to Texas, and it was okay. It was fine for 3 years, and it'll be 5 years, but it'll be fine for 5 years at Northwest Stadium till the new place gets built. All right. That's the good news. Coming up, we'll get to some NBA from last night. Dallas Mavericks with a monster second quarter blew out Sacramento last night. We'll get to details on that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So 62 years ago today, 2 of the biggest stars in the NFL were suspended for an entire season for gambling. For betting on their own team, kind of Pete Rose territory. And they were not banned for life, as Rose was. But Paul Hornung and Alex Karras were banned by Commissioner Pete Rosselle for an entire year. Hornung came completely clean. Karras was angry and never admitted to anything. But the way that gambling is now embraced, especially by the NFL, it's fun to look back on that, and we'll get to that in the next hour. Meantime, NBA play-ins go on. Last night, Tyler Hero, the Hero, for the Miami Heat as they beat the Bulls 109-90. Hero had 38 points, and Miami really took control of this game early. I mean, both these games last night were complete blowouts. Miami was up 71-47 at the half. They now will play Atlanta tomorrow for the right to play Cleveland in the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. Hawks lost to Orlando, as you know, on Tuesday. And then, you know about the crazy season it's been for the Dallas Mavericks, where they trade away Luka Doncic to the Los Angeles Lakers, and the fan base is really angry, and the media is just ripping Nico Harrison, the general manager, and it's expected that he'll be fired once the season is over for the Mavs. But in the meantime, he's telling people that he has no regrets about trading Luka Doncic to the Los Angeles Lakers, which has made them, you know, a one of the favorites, if not the favorite from the West, to win the NBA championship. But they had this news conference the other day, and it was only for select reporters, no cameras, no recording devices. Bizarre, right? Who has a news conference like that? And according to Shams Charania, who is the new insider on the NBA for ESPN, he says, my understanding is Nico Harrison did not want to do this closed-door roundtable. That was not his idea. That was something that was enforced by the owner, Patrick Dumont. And Dumont is the guy, and I've heard this, maybe you've heard this as well, that they don't have legalized betting in Texas, so he wants to move the team to Las Vegas and wants to connect it to casinos and stuff that he has there. But it reminded me of this, and he may have had more than one, but I don't think he had more than one. Michael Jordan was Desk Jordan. Remember, he came in midway through the 1999-2000 season, and a massive news conference. I mean, it was a coronation when he got here in January of 2000. So they get through that season. He fires Gar Heard right away. They finish it out, and then he comes in as Desk Jordan for the 2000-2001 season, and he's going to show everybody how he can build a team. Well, they were terrible. They won 19 games. And as I remember, there was only one news conference, invitation only. I got one of the invites, and all it was Jordan sitting at a desk, and we were sitting in the stands, I believe, at the practice court, as I remember. And all you got was one question and one follow-up for King Jordan. That was it. I mean, there have been general managers in this town who I could call on the telephone anytime I wanted, like Ernie Grunfeld, okay, John Nash. But no, Michael Jordan had like this presidential news conference, one question, one follow-up, that was it. And, you know, we know how that worked out with Jordan. He came and he played 2 years. They won 37 games each year, didn't make the playoffs, and then he was booted out of town by Abe Pollin, never moved here. And the lingering image is of Jordan pulling out of the arena in his Mercedes with Illinois plates. That told you all you needed to know about Michael Jordan's commitment to this area. But the Nico Harrison thing, what a mess. And meantime, the team somehow was able, without Kyrie Irving, who went down with a knee injury that's going to keep him out probably till at least January of next year. Somehow they managed to get into the play-in, and last night they played at Sacramento, and they took control of this early. They had 44 points in the second quarter of the game, went on to win easily, 120-106. After the game, the Kings fired their general manager, Monty McNair. Klay Thompson's big night for Dallas, 23 points, 16 in that second quarter. And after all that this team has been through this year, when you have Anthony Davis and you have Klay Thompson and you have a roster of players who were in the NBA Finals last year, minus Kyrie, they could make things interesting as they move on to play Memphis tomorrow night. Klay Thompson on with Scott Van Pelt on ESPN last night on his season and what he was able to do last night.
We've had to endure quite the year, especially when it comes to the injury bug. And yeah, no doubt. To have our team almost complete, obviously we miss our brother in Kyrie. I mean, we all can imagine what he would do for our team. With sky's the limit with he's in the lineup, but we're so desperate to keep the postseason alive. It's a privilege to play basketball this time of year. And I told the guys before the game, I mean, we have nothing to lose. Go out here with a free swing, play for each other, and play free-minded, because that's when we're at our best. And there's nothing like being able to compete this time of year. It's truly special.
Clay, that second quarter, we just showed the highlights. You were on one. As I'm watching, I was like, let's see how long the ball's in his hands before it's up in the air. I mean, it's look, I know you've been doing it for a while, but you've still got that gear. And when it starts going, what's that like? What are those moments like?
It's why you train so hard, year in and year out, to be ready for moments like that. And I know I didn't end my season last year so well in this same building. And I knew once I saw one go in and I got my feet under me, I was going to let it go until I missed. And luckily for me, I didn't miss that quarter. And I think that helped us separate and hold on to that lead, obviously, for the rest of the night.
No doubt. Now, you and AD combined for 50, and there's a bunch of guys that made a finals run on this team and know what this is about. I think that gets underestimated, again, in the midst of all the chatter. And what do you lean into, Clay, as you head to take on a very talented and young Memphis team on Friday night that, again, might catch people off guard if they're asleep?
Well, this was a great test for us. I mean, Sacramento's crowd is one of the best in the league, and it was electric in here to start the night. And this is what's going to prepare us to come when we go to Memphis. We know how talented that group is, and they have a great home court. But like you said, Scott, a lot of these guys have had finals experience, and a lot of guys are hungry to have an experience like that. And when you combine our young athletes with the veterans we have, we can hopefully continue this season and give it everything we have, because we want to give the city of Dallas something to be proud of, at least, especially with their energy and effort. And we're going to go to Memphis and lay it all out there, and that's all we can ask.
So that's tomorrow night. That's Dallas at Memphis. They win that game, means they go to Oklahoma City on Sunday. And Oklahoma City has been the best team. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who will win the MVP this year, but they're a young team. And Dallas, you know, although they don't have Kyrie and although they traded Luka, they have Anthony Davis, who's won a championship before with the Lakers with LeBron, and they have Klay Thompson, who's won 4 of them with Golden State. So they've had tested players and a roster full of guys who were in the finals last year. So that makes it intriguing if in fact they can get past Memphis tomorrow night and then play Oklahoma City in the first round of the playoffs. Tim Legler did the game last night for ESPN. He was on with Scott Van Pelt with the recap of what he saw.
They turned off the electricity in this building, and there was a run by the Kings at the end of the first quarter where this place really was starting to erupt. And what happened in the second quarter changed what was going to happen for the rest of the night. It wasn't just the heater that Clay got on. He also had some help on that end of the floor. But really it was defensively what Dallas did to Sacramento during that quarter. 10 turnovers forced, and these weren't unforced. This was Dallas with their length and their speed and their physicality around the rim. They just absolutely suffocated Sacramento in that quarter, set the tone there. That led to their success on the other end of the floor. So no, it's not an over-exaggeration to say that this game was the second quarter and Dallas dominated on both ends.
You know, in talking to Clay, Legs, this team's got championship DNA through a lot of guys. They made a finals run. We all understand who they traded. But in Clay and AD, you've got guys who've done it, right? You got a coach who's done it. And they've also been just decimated by injury, yes, but the group that's played together, at some point they figure out, all right, this is who we got. Do they have enough to go to Memphis and not just compete, but potentially win that game? What's your assessment of that?
Well, yeah, based on what I saw tonight, I mean, defensively, that's what it's going to take against a team like Memphis. It's going to be a little bit of a different challenge for them than what they saw tonight. I mean, Sacramento is not a team that plays with a ton of pace, and it was important in this game against Dallas with the two bigs to do it. You can't just change your identity overnight, even though you make it a priority. Memphis does play with a lot of pace. They're going to get up the floor earlier against the double big lineup, so it's a different type of challenge. But what I saw tonight out of Dallas defensively and the commitment that they had, how sharp they were with their communication and how intent they were. They came here to do business, and they want a spot in the big dance. They want a spot in the playoffs. I think, yes, what I saw tonight means they could go on the road and win a game, but it certainly won't be easy against a very good Memphis team. Dallas, super impressive tonight, though.
I'm with you. I also agree. I think Memphis is going to be a whole different hill to climb, but this is a great building they went into and won tonight. I just want to get your thought on just the overall energy that surrounds this Dallas team, man. We all understand that fan base is wounded and they are still bitter. But this group, like, what matters is the group. And I think the effort we saw from the group says, look, we get it. Y'all are pissed off, but we're trying to play here. How have they managed to sort of tune that out and focus their attention?
Yeah, well, look, I think we're all surprised that we're even in this situation because once Kyrie Irving went down and Anthony Davis was hurt at the time, I think everybody fully expected to see Anthony Davis next year and just get a fresh start, hit a reset over the summer, figure out what roster adjustments they want to make, and proceed with this guy that you acquired in giving up Luka Doncic. But Anthony Davis fought to make it back at the end of the year. And I think in large part he wanted to come out and prove something and prove to people what he is as a player. And he's more than gotten his feet wet now. I thought tonight he looked good. He was aggressive. He didn't shoot the ball particularly well, but it looked like the dominant Anthony Davis on both ends that we know he can be. And so now you look at them a little bit differently than you did a few weeks ago, getting this guy back and how confident they look tonight. You mentioned Klay Thompson and AD. You know, Scott, they've got a few other guys on this roster that went to the finals a year ago. So they're used to deep playoff runs, some of the guys on this roster, and playing under bright lights. They're not going to be fazed by what they see on Friday night. I mean, who knows how that game ultimately goes? But I think it was a big statement by Anthony Davis making it back to this point to at least give Dallas a chance to extend their season.
That's Tim Legler last night with Scott Van Pelt. What has happened with stories like this and the Lakers and several others, not Oklahoma City or Boston or some of the top teams, but 31 years ago, the Denver Nuggets played at Seattle. This was a 1 versus 8 matchup. This is before they had play-in games and all that other chazarai. And the lasting image of the late, great Dikembe Mutombo is him on the floor on his back grabbing the ball as time ran out, and this massive upset by the Denver Nuggets over the top seed Seattle Supersonics, who are now Oklahoma City. That was like, whoa, look at that. And now, you know, we're talking about teams in the play-in like Golden State, which won the other night, like Dallas, which won last night, like the Lakers, who are not going to be one of the top seeds doing it. And it just further diminishes the regular season. And, you know, it used to be you play all year, so you get the home court advantage. You know, that's, I think in basketball, that's still the most important. We know it's not important in hockey. It's important in football, but we see, you know, road teams win all the time. Wild card teams go to the Super Bowl. But in basketball, and Adam Silver's let this happen, this was not something that David Stern took lightly. In fact, I remember years ago, Magic Johnson sitting out a late season game, resting up for the playoffs. Stern fined him. Yeah, that's you got to put your team out on the floor. Whereas Adam Silver has been all in with this load management stuff, and they found that the load management doesn't decrease injuries. So now you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, and you've got veteran guys who are basically blowing off the regular season. I'm not saying Dallas did that. You know, they had a lot of upheaval, obviously, and then losing Kyrie hurt them, sure. But the fact that they're resuscitated now, and now it really means something once you get in the playoffs, you know, and if you really want to go back on this, this is not a factor anymore because realistically, these guys lose money in the postseason compared to what they make. But you probably heard me tell this story many times, but this goes back to the 1960s when the Green Bay Packers were making regular appearances in the championship game. They did play in the first 2 Super Bowls, but even prior to that, playing for the title. And Vince Lombardi would threaten to trade a player, and the player would get all nervous. Not that he loved playing for the Packers and Lombardi that much. No, I mean, that was a job, and that was a team, and he was in the NFL. But Lombardi would threaten to trade him, and the problem was that The wives had already spent the $6,000 that they would get in championship shares, which was in some cases about what they made during the regular season, or maybe, a little bit less. And so playing for the cash was a big thing. Hell, when the Redskins played the Super Bowl, the first one under Gibbs, and if you've seen the highlight film, it's Joe Theismann with his teammates huddling around him, and he said, this game is worth $70,000 and a big effing ring. Yeah, the ring was a big part of it, but part of the strike settlement of that year of 1982 was that they doubled the money for winning the Super Bowl. And it was a big deal for these guys, some of them making $27,000, $28,000 a year, to get $70,000 for winning a championship. This was a big, big thing. It's not the case anymore in basketball. So you got these guys who are semi-interested in the regular season. Once you get in the postseason, it's about rings and legacy and things like that. Cash is basically meaningless because the total take, I don't know what it is, but it's let's say it's $100,000. These guys are making that per game. That's not a big deal. So that's all part of the big picture there. But it just illustrates to me that we talk about these teams in the play-in as being contenders to win a championship, and reality is they barely got into the postseason. It doesn't happen as much in other sports, though we have seen more wild card winners win Super Bowls in recent years in the NFL. All right, coming up in the next hour, we will get to what Dan Quinn said in a very interesting podcast conversation. Also, do you think that Travis Hunter is really going to walk away from football if he's not offered the chance to play both ways? I don't, but we'll explore some ideas on that as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Before we get to Dan Quinn and his appearance on the Glue Guys podcast, this is, I guess, breaking news from ESPN. Lee Corso will make his last appearance on College Game Day Saturday, August 30th, which is week one of the season. He is turning 90 in August, so he will be 90 when he does this, and he will put on the headgear for the last time. And this is kind of what they did with Hubie Brown. Hubie Brown, also 90, did his last game, I believe it was Super Bowl Sunday, with Mike Breen. And Hubie was great analyst, and still great. But I think that was more his choice, 90 years old. I don't know this, but I think Corso may have been pushed a little bit. He had a stroke some years ago, and his appearance, he's still beloved. It still brings a big cheer when he puts on the headgear. I would imagine they'll retire that unless maybe Kirk Herbstreit is anointed as the next headgear guy. I don't know, but it was a great idea. I mean, the guy's been doing this for 38 years that he's been on coverage of college football on ESPN. And Corso, early on in his career, was an assistant coach both at Maryland and Navy, so he's got some local roots. He was at one time the head coach at Indiana, and I guess, he reached kind of the end of the line there, wasn't going to get another head coaching opportunity, so came to ESPN, and has worked out obviously very well for him. But at 90, it's time. Now, Dick Vitale is in his 80s at this point. I think 80, 81. He says he'd like to, keep going forever on this, and God bless him. He's raised a lot of money for children's cancer. You got to give him an awful lot of credit for that, and also that he's persevered through his own battles through cancer. But his voice is just about gone. They put him on with another analyst when they do the games, and at some point I think he'll be gently pushed out the door. But Lee Corso, in his prime, was really good. I mean, he brought a lot of energy to the set. He still tries to bring in as much as he can, but it's kind of hard to understand him from time to time because of the stroke. And you wish him nothing but the best. He seems like a very fine guy. I don't know him at all. Don't know him. But I really have admired his work over the years, and this will be the last appearance for him, August 30th, on the opening week of the college football season. By the way, the NFL is going to gobble that up pretty soon too. It used to be that the NFL was playing on Labor Day. In fact, I remember the Redskins started the season August 31st once, the regular season. And they looked at the ratings for Labor Day weekend. They said, nah, not that good. We'll start a week later. Well, once they go to 18 games with 2 byes, which is apparently the plan here, they will start on Labor Day weekend. And the hell with college football, who has sort of camped out on that spot right now. Anyway, Dan Quinn was on either last week or the week before. It's a podcast which is co-hosted by Alex Smith, former quarterback with Kansas City and finished up here. Shane Battier, the former Duke star, played a long time in the NBA. And Raul Gupta, who I guess put up the money for this, very successful businessman. He participates in it, but kind of leaves the questioning to the 2 former athletes. And Dan Quinn was on. I guess he doesn't really have any real crossing with Alex Smith other than they both were in the NFL. As Quinn as a coach and Alex Smith as a player, but there's mutual respect there, as you can hear it. And Quinn is a big basketball guy. He makes basketball references all the time. So we'll play parts 2 and 3 of this tomorrow, very long pieces. He's quite good on this. But you don't really hear him talk about how he got to where he got to. And it's a difficult thing to do when you don't play at a level like the NFL or even high-level college football. Now, Dan Quinn went to Salisbury State. That's Division III football. And to get to the point where he was a head coach of the Atlanta Falcons in his 40s, not easy to do. And he was able to do that, got them to a Super Bowl, had the epic collapse against the Patriots, one call here or there, and maybe the whole story is different. Maybe he's still coaching the Falcons. You never know. But now he's the coach here. Very good thing from this past year, getting to the NFC Championship game. But this is how you get to where you get to playing Division III football.
In coaching, there's like different levels of leadership that you'll have, mostly on the way into spots. And I had been a position coach in the NFL for a long time. I was a defensive line coach, and I really wanted like a bigger leadership opportunity. So I actually left the NFL. I'd been coaching defensive line for like 10 years and went back to college as a coordinator. It was when it was like, all right, I need to go prove it. But going there, it was like, okay, do I have to do it like this person or this person? And it was probably during that next experience where you're really leading other coaches and no longer just your own position, that it better be true to the way that you do it. And so I was fortunate, like as I got another level up, I got to lead, a defensive staff at that point. So I think those are like important markers, because if you just went from like just being in charge of yourself and then all of a sudden being in charge of leading a group of coaches or a staff, like that's a big deal. And I think they were like good lessons for me. So when I went back to Seattle as a defensive coordinator, I went from Florida as defensive coordinator to Seattle. Okay, I was in charge of maybe 8 coaches and the defensive group. And then you go to an NFL team and it's, 20 coaches and all the players. And so hitting those steps was important for me, but having other good people that showed examples, the right way to do it. And then also someone say like, we've all wrote that list down to the side, like, I will never fucking do this. As it comes up. And then I became, to answer Shane's question, like, how do you make sure it's true to yourself? I think you have to be honest, like, what are the things I'm really good at? And I also wanted to hire a staff of people that weren't exactly just like me, where when I came here to D.C., it wasn't like all of people that I knew. There were plenty of people that I wanted new lenses and new insights onto things.
Talk about that. That's scary. All right.
Yeah, it is a little bit.
You get back to the first chair and you're Abraham Lincoln team of rivals all of a sudden. Talk about like how and why and where's that come from? That's scary.
Well, I think I probably have to wind it back a little bit, Shane, because I got fired in Atlanta. I'd been there 6 seasons and I got fired maybe like just right at the start of the season. The team wasn't doing well. It was the season of 2020. And at the time, I thought it was like the worst thing that could have happened to me to be let go at that time, because you have this probably 3-month break that you're not with the team. I'd been on a team for my whole life, so it was like this lonely space, but it also gave me like this window to like look back and say, all right, what has to change? What part of the scheme had to change? What part of my looking at things could be different? So if I did get that shot again, it wasn't going to be just, hey, rinse and repeat. So like most things, what we think is the worst thing that can happen at that time wasn't that way at all. Had I gotten fired, maybe Shane, like at the end of that season, and then just went to Dallas, like the next week, like it's kind of a traditional model in the NFL, I don't know if I would have changed as many things. Mm-hmm. And that helped me going into this next space to really make sure if I was going to go to a spot that like we could let it rip and kick ass. And so I was pretty selective. I'd been a head coach before, so if I never got to do it again, I wasn't going to be crushed about it. Like I was enjoying what I was doing and hopefully making an impact. So like it would only be a spot where, man, you could really let it rip and win. And so that's why I think I had some more perspective coming on to this next lap to say it's not a rinse and repeat thing.
Am I correct? Did you do a 360 review?
I did. And I don't know, I didn't know what one of those was.
Neither did I.
Atlanta, but
no one in sports knows what that is.
Yeah,
I learned it from Ravi. Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, we'll let Coach start out, and I'll fill in any gaps.
Yeah, there's a lot of gaps you're gonna have to fill in. When I got to Atlanta, the owner is Arthur Blank. Like this is a world-class business person. Like started Home Depot, and so the 360 was my first time. This is gonna sound unusual. I'd never been evaluated as an assistant coach by like the head coach or the defense coordinator. Sat down and like, hey, this is where people think you're strong or weak or where it goes. Usually it's like, hey, you're doing a good job. Here's your next contract, and you're just kind of rolling. So I like feedback, so I liked it. And a 360 was where other people in different departments, put a lens onto you, and it was a little bit too businessy for me. Like, how does he relate to the customers? So it was definitely like a model that he had used in the business world. So I kind of created one that was just football, and I'd hired a good friend who worked with Fox named Laura Oakman. And I said, I'd like you to talk to, between, 30 to 50 people, some that it went great with, some that it didn't, some front office, some coaches. But I just want to know if there was any blind spots for me that I had to address. And so like in true friendship, people would call like, hey man, like this person called, is this a real thing? Is this cool? like, yeah, bro, I love you. Thank you for sharing. But like, yeah, I really want you to do this, because I had no interest in who said it, none. So I didn't want that. I didn't want anybody to have, and some people like put my name on this. He's all, whatever it was, but that doesn't interest me. I just want to know, were there any themes that took place that I wouldn't repeat? And so it was useful because it did find some things like where probably like the three of you, I like to solve problems and help others. So like there's times I took on too much, and I can help with the D-line, I can help with this guy, and I can help with that. And then all of a sudden, by the end, I was working harder than I ever had and having less results. So there was like examples like that I was, hey, I'm not going to repeat that.
That's Dan Quinn on the podcast, The Glue Guys, with Shane Battier, Alex Smith, and Raul Gupta, who put the whole thing together, very successful in business. I'll play the other two parts of it, and some of that you heard about the 360 review, all those type of things. But I think the most important thing about coaching, from what I understand about it, is getting those opportunities. And sometimes you have to veer off course to do that. And the best example that I know of this is what Bill Walsh did. Now, Bill Walsh was the offensive guru. I don't even know if they called them coordinators then, but Paul Brown, who had been fired by the Cleveland Browns when he was coaching Jim Brown in the 1960s, and later was part of an ownership group. And in fact, his son is now the primary owner of the Cincinnati Bengals. They put that together as an AFL expansion team, I think 1966. And Bill Walsh was a guy who worked with him. And we also had an assistant named Tiger Johnson. I guess if your name is Tiger, even then it was a pretty good thing. So Paul Brown finally reaches the point, after all the success he'd had, coaching at Maslin. I think he coached at Ohio State, and later the Cleveland Browns, which were named for him. They came in from the old All-American Football Conference and won a bunch of championships with Otto Graham. They were a model franchise, and he's really the architect of a lot of modern football. He was the first one to have film reviews, and they had meetings, and they had playbooks, and all that stuff that wasn't there before, as football was very primitive. He brought it into the modern era. So Paul Brown finally retires. This is like 1970, 71. And Bill Walsh had done remarkable things. They had a quarterback named Greg Cook. And Greg Cook was incredible in 1969 under the tutelage of Bill Walsh. And sadly, he suffered a shoulder injury midway through the season, tried to play through it, and it turned out that essentially ended his career. It was a torn rotator cuff. And nowadays they have the surgery to do it. They didn't have that then, and that was the end of him. That's when Bill Walsh invented the West Coast offense, even though it was in Cincinnati, right in the Midwest, smack in the middle of the Midwest. He called it the West Coast offense, and it was because it was based on the short passing game with a quarterback named Virgil Carter who didn't have the arm that Greg Cook had. So it was everything you saw him do in San Francisco with Joe Montana and Steve Young and Jerry Rice and all the great players that he had there. That was invented on the fly because they needed to do something with a quarterback who didn't have a big arm, and that was Virgil Carter. And so, anyway, after that happens, then Paul Brown retires, and he gives the job to Tiger Johnson. And obviously, Bill Walsh is incensed about this. What are you talking about, So he knew that in order to become a head coach, he had to be a head coach. And so that's when he went to Stanford. And he won at Stanford with Guy Benjamin. Now, he did not play John Elway. He recruited John Elway. But he left before Elway started his career at Stanford. That gave him the opportunity to go to the San Francisco 49ers, and the rest is history. So when you hear Dan Quinn say, I was 10 years a defensive line coach. I wanted to become a coordinator. I had to go to college to do that. He got that opportunity at Florida. That brings him back in the NFL as a defensive coordinator in Seattle, where they win a Super Bowl. That gets him to the Atlanta Falcons. He gets him to the Super Bowl. Things dissipate from there. He goes to Dallas, and now he's gotten his opportunity here and got the team back to the NFC Championship game for the first time since 1991, the 91 season. Remarkable. So we'll play some more of that conversation tomorrow. But up next, it was 62 years ago today that Commissioner Pete Rosselle looked at two of the biggest stars in the NFL and said, "You're gone for a year for gambling." That's next. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So nowadays, gambling in football, they're bedfellows, and it's amazing how quickly this ramped up when you go back, not that many years ago where the NFL was afraid of this. Oh, we can never, ever have gambling. We just can't do that. That'll just, make it the fans won't buy what we're selling here. We just can't have it. In 2003, the NFL rejected an offer from the Las Vegas Convention Visitors Authority to buy a 30-second commercial during the Super Bowl. Commissioner Roger Goodell wrote a letter to the governor of Delaware in 2009 condemning the state's effort to renew its NFL betting lottery. Goodell wrote, "By legalizing sports betting, it will be in Delaware's interest to create even larger numbers of new gamblers as the state attempts to maximize any revenue found in this promotion. The negative social impact of additional gambling cannot be minimized in the community." And there was even Tony Romo, who wanted to have a fantasy football convention in Vegas, and they shot that down. There wasn't even any money involved. They were scared to death of gambling, and now, of course, gambling legal in states, and you have all the different betting sites that are in bed with the NFL. But back in 1963, 52 years ago, the NFL started to get wind of betting that was going on. Now, it probably happened in the past, and there were allegations that Bobby Lane had done this when he was quarterback of the Lions and the Pittsburgh Steelers, but, never caught. But finally, Pete Rosselle was a young man when he took over as commissioner in 1960, a few years into the job, is hearing things about some of the star players. And two of the biggest stars, Paul Hornung, who in 1961 had set an NFL record with 176 points. He was both what they called a halfback and the kicker in those days. So in a new 14-game schedule, which came in 1961, he was able to score all those points, both extra points, field goals, and touchdowns, 176 points. But along the way, he was, a guy who liked the nightlife. He liked the ladies. He was single, and he liked to drink. And, he was out, caravanting around town, even though it was only Green Bay, although he would, in other cities, he would have a good time. And he got caught. He was betting money. And so was Alex Karras. Horning was called by Pete Rosselle to show up in New York and talk about this. And Horning knew what he wanted. And he said, look, I know you're going to want me to name names, Pete. I'm not going to do it. He said, I did it. I'm truly sorry what I did. He was betting, somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 to $200 and bet as much as $500 on NFL games when, in the early 60s, that was a hell of a lot of money. Karras, Rosselle found out, had bet at least 6 bets of $50 or $100. He never admitted to anything. And in this investigation that came out, Rosselle also found 5 other Detroit Lions, Joe Schmidt, Wayne Walker, John Gordy, Gary Lowe, and Sam Williams. They were fined $2,000 each for betting $50 on the Packers in the 1962 championship game against the Giants. And since the Packers covered the 6-point spread, the players all lost money. They lost a total of $2,000. So it was not a very profitable bet for them, and a big fine to go along with it. A $2,000 fine in 1963 was a lot of money. But Horning took his medicine and took his suspension and sat out the entire 1963 season. And although he wouldn't go to New York, his coach, Vince Lombardi, who at one time called Paul Horning the best player he ever coached. He coached a bunch of Hall of Famers, but said that Horning was the best he ever coached. And Lombardi was summoned to New York to meet with Pete Rosselle, who he knew. And Lombardi asked him, what are you going to do? And Rosselle said, well, I'm going to suspend them each for a full season. And Lombardi said, you have no choice, do you? And Rosselle said, I don't think so, Vinny. Let's go get a drink. So 10 years after this, after Horning had retired from the NFL, and there was a show called Greatest Sports Legends that was hosted by Howard Cosell, Horning talked about the gambling suspension with the legendary Cosell, and the suspension had come on this day in 1962.
April 17, 1963. Pete Rosselle announces Paul Horning, along with Alex Karras, suspended indefinitely for gambling improprieties.
Well, Howard, I guess when I went through that 1963, it was probably the most important year of my life. Well, you knew how I was in those days. I was carefree and probably am today, but when I was betting on the football games, I didn't believe that it was, it was that important a danger until nationally when I was suspended. I knew earlier, in January and February, that I was going to be suspended. I knew some action was going to be taken by Commissioner Rosselle, and I felt that, he had every right to do what he did, to suspend myself. When you're going through something like that, it's all right on your own shoulders. Everybody would say, well, Paul, what about, was it there any other football players betting? When something like that happens to you, you wonder then about your life, because it was an important decision. That year, I had talked to Coach Lombardi about it many, many times after that, and he reassured me. He said, Paul, keep your nose clean for a year, stay away from the Derby and the horses, and I know you'd like to go to the races. Please do me one favor. When the year is up, when they will review your case next year, there's a good possibility that you will be reinstated, and that's actually what I wanted more than anything in life. And I did lead a exemplary life for that 1 year.
You did. I wonder, though, if your mother and Vince ever got over the hurt of what you had done. And I suspect, too, maybe you learned something that year you were out about the young people of this country.
Well, there's a cliche, you learn who your friends are when something like that happens to you. And I did, in fact, learn who my friends were during that year. Also, Howard, I learned one great thing. It wasn't the danger of myself. I could afford betting $300 or $400 on football. The danger of it is if somebody who can't afford it gets hooked in betting and who gets hooked with the gamblers, maybe they will ask them to throw a football game. That is very, very dangerous. But I would say that the hurt comes with the youngsters, the teenagers, the young kids who look up to any athlete. because they feel that anything that a ball player in my position would have done in those days, well, that was all right. That's the danger of it. I received so many letters from kids who really couldn't understand, and I tried to answer each one of them the best way I could. I really felt that, if I let anybody down, not only my family, my coach and the players, that it was the youngsters who looked up to Paul Hornung in those days.
That's Paul Hornung, the late Paul Hornung, and the late Howard Cosell in 1973, discussing the year-long suspension that Hornung received 10 years earlier. And the fallout from that was that he was, somewhat admired for coming clean. I mean, he said, yeah, sure, I bet on us. I bet on us to win. We were good. We always covered the number. So, that is the opposite of Pete Rose, who denied everything. Hornung came clean on that, and I think he was seen in a different light because of that. And in fact, at an airport, someone spotted him and said, what an SOB that Rosselle is. How could he ban a guy for betting on his own team? Worst thing he's ever done. And Hornung said, no, sir, you're wrong about that. Rosselle was right. I was in the wrong. When I broke the rule, he did what he had to do. That wasn't the case with Karras. Karras was really upset about this. He spent the year out of football in pro wrestling, and had a match against Dick DeBruiser, said that he made $17,000 more than his NFL salary wrestling that year. He called Rosselle a buzzard. The reinstatement actually came with some conditions. Neither could visit Las Vegas when they were playing. Hornung wasn't allowed to attend the Kentucky Derby, and he's from Louisville, much less bet on the horses as long as he was in the league. And Karras' reinstatement came with similar restrictions, including he had to sell a stake that he had in a bar. And during the 1964 season, when he came back with the Lions, an official brought Karras to midfield because he was the defensive captain and asked him to make a call on the coin toss. And Karras said, I'm sorry, sir, I'm not permitted to gamble. He had a good sense of humor. Became an actor, Mongo in Blazing Saddles, and had at one time he had a series. He was on Monday Night Football. In fact, when the Lions cut him after the 1970 season, before 1971, George Allen claimed him on waivers, and Karras said, I only want to play for a winner. That team went to the playoffs, which he did only once during his entire career with the Detroit Lions. Anyway, after their careers, Paul Hornung became a fixture at Churchill Downs and, of course, the Kentucky Derby. And Karras, of course, went on to do a lot of acting and became very much of a public figure, probably even more of a public figure than when he played, although he was an outstanding player. The thing about both of these guys, and this is a part of the NFL or the Pro Football Hall of Fame that differs from baseball. Baseball they consider character. Football, you're not supposed to. And although these guys both served their suspensions, and in the case of Hornung, came totally clean with it, had no problem admitting it. It took them both a long time to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It wasn't until 1986, which was the 15th time that Hornung was on the ballot, that he got in, and Karras had to wait 45 years to get in 2020, and at that point he had passed away. Hornung lived long enough to see that, but that was something that was a little bit different because the voters are not supposed to consider anything off the field. It was only on the field, but obviously they did, and it took both of them a long time to get into the Hall of Fame. Here's the postscript to this: the same league that has suspended Karras and Hornung for gambling, the announcement of Karras' posthumous election to Canton was broken on the NFL Network right over the Fantasy Showdown, the graphic there, sponsored by DraftKings. Most accounts that followed contained some variation of the word finally got in. So it's an interesting chapter in the history of the NFL. And as we look at all the enticements to gamble on football and other sports now, you have to remember in 1963, two of the biggest stars were kicked out of the league for an entire year for betting 100 here, 100 here on football games. Though in the case of Hornung, he admitted on betting on the Packers, but always bet them to win because, as he said, they were good and they always covered the number. All right, that is a wrap for me. Looks like Bram is coming up next, and I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.